The sound of tearing fabric ripped through the silent cabin, followed by the heavy, sickening thud of a body hitting the aisle floor. 30 phones were already in the air. Recording the exact moment, 2 airport security officers dragged a stunned, bleeding woman by her shoulders out of first class. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made a threat. Her only crime was sitting in seat 2A, a seat she paid for, and refusing to be invisible. Chloe Hastings was not a woman who intimidated easily. At 34, she was the vice president of global acquisitions for a top-tier cybersecurity firm based out of Chicago. She had spent the last 72 hours in a windowless boardroom in Manhattan, systematically tearing down the defenses of a stubborn tech startup until they agreed to an $80 million buyout. She was exhausted, her bones ached with a deep, marrow-deep fatigue, and her mind was a fog of legal jargon and financial projections. All she wanted was to board Meridian Airlines Flight 402 to London, recline her seat, and sleep for 7 uninterrupted hours. It was a Tuesday evening at JFK International Airport. Terminal 4 was a chaotic symphony of rolling suitcases, frantic announcements, and the low, collective murmur of thousands of tired travelers. Chloe bypassed the snaking economy lines, her black leather briefcase clutched in one hand, her tailored charcoal blazer draped over her other arm. She approached the priority desk. "Good evening," Chloe said, sliding her passport and platinum loyalty card across the polished counter. "I'd like to see if there are any available upgrades to first class. I'm currently in business, but I really need the sleep." The gate agent, a young man named Brian, typed briskly at his keyboard. "Let me check for you, miss." "Hastings, you're in luck. We had a last-minute cancellation. Seat 2A is open. It's going to be an additional $2,000 for the upgrade." "I'll take it," Chloe said without hesitation, handing over her corporate American Express. Brian smiled warmly, printed her new boarding pass, and handed it to her. "You're all set, Ms. Hastings. Boarding will begin in 10 minutes at gate B22. Enjoy the flight." Chloe thanked him and made her way to the gate. When the call for first class and diamond tier members crackled over the intercom, she was the third person down the jet bridge. Stepping onto the Boeing 777, she immediately felt the shift in atmosphere. The first-class cabin was an oasis of calm, bathed in soft, warm amber lighting. The seats were massive private pods of cream-colored leather. She found seat 2A, stowed her briefcase in the overhead bin, and sank into the luxurious leather. She closed her eyes, letting out a long, slow breath. The stress of the last 3 days began to melt away. She slipped off her loafers, accepted a warm towel from a passing junior flight attendant, and prepared to disconnect from the world. That was when Susan Cartwright noticed her. Susan was the lead flight attendant for the first-class cabin. She was a woman in her late 50s, with rigidly sprayed blonde hair, a perfectly pressed navy uniform, and a smile that rarely reached her cold, calculating eyes. Susan had been flying for 30 years, and over those decades she had developed a very rigid, very prejudiced internal algorithm of who belonged in her cabin and who did not. Susan paused in the aisle, her eyes narrowing as they landed on Chloe. Chloe, a young black woman in a simple white silk blouse, resting with her eyes closed. Susan checked her handheld manifest tablet. The tablet clearly showed a passenger in 2A, but the system hadn't fully refreshed the last-minute gate upgrade name. It still showed a pending status from the cancellation. Without asking the gate agent, Susan made a split-second, entirely biased assumption. "Excuse me," Susan's voice sliced through Chloe's impending sleep. It was sharp, loud, and dripped with condescension. Chloe opened her eyes, blinking against the reading light. "Yes, I need to see your boarding pass," Susan demanded, not bothering with a greeting or a smile. Chloe frowned slightly, sitting up. Of course. She reached into her blazer pocket, retrieved the heavy cardstock pass, and handed it over. Susan snatched it, her eyes scanning the print. She frowned. This says 2A, but you were upgraded at the gate. Yes. About 20 minutes ago, Chloe replied, her tone polite but firm. There's been a mistake, Susan stated flatly, handing the ticket back as if it were contaminated. This seat is reserved for a VIP passenger. You need to gather your things and move to the back. Chloe stared at her, genuinely confused. Move to the back. The gate agent just sold me this upgrade. I paid for it, it's my seat. The agent made an error, Susan said, her voice rising in volume, intentionally drawing the attention of the other wealthy passengers settling into their pods. This seat belongs to Mr. Langley. He is a Diamond Elite member. You need to vacate the seat immediately, miss. I am also a Diamond member, Chloe said, keeping her voice incredibly calm despite the sudden spike of adrenaline in her chest. She knew this dance. She had lived this dance her entire corporate life. The assumption of incompetence, the presumption of poverty. I have a receipt. I have a boarding pass. I am not moving unless you can show me proof that this seat was double booked. Susan's face flushed a mottled, angry red. She was not used to being challenged, especially not by someone she had already dismissed in her mind. Listen to me, Susan leaned in, dropping her voice to a harsh whisper. I don't know how you tricked the system at the desk, but you are not flying in this cabin today. Grab your bag and walk to economy or I will have you removed. Chloe's jaw set. The exhaustion evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Get the captain, or get the gate agent, because I am not going anywhere. Susan stood up straight, glaring down at Chloe with pure venom. Fine. You want to do it the hard way. Have it your way. She spun on her heel and marched toward the front galley, snatching the intercom phone off its wall mount. Chloe took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer, suffocating weight of the indignity. Across the aisle, a middle-aged white man in a bespoke suit paused his movie to stare at her. Chloe met his eyes, and he quickly looked away. She was entirely alone. 5 minutes passed. The boarding process for the rest of the plane had slowed to a crawl. The tension in the first-class cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then the heavy footsteps echoed down the jet bridge. 3 figures entered the cabin. The first was Susan, looking triumphant. Behind her was Richard Langley. Langley was a 60-something hedge fund manager, a man who wore his immense wealth like a weapon. He looked annoyed, tapping his gold Rolex. Behind them were 2 airport security officers. Not police, but the airport's private aviation security force. Officer Miller, a large, heavy-set man with a flushed face, and Officer Davies, a younger, nervous-looking recruit. There she is. Susan pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at Chloe. She slipped into first class, stole Mr. Langley's seat, and is now refusing lawful crew instructions. She's becoming aggressive. Chloe's eyes widened at the blatant lie. Aggressive? I've been sitting here quietly. I have my boarding pass right here. She held it up again. Officer Miller stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. He didn't even look at the pass. Ma'am, the flight crew has asked you to leave the aircraft. You need to comply. I am not leaving the aircraft, Chloe said, her voice steady, projecting clearly so everyone in the cabin could hear. I paid $2,000 for an upgrade at the gate. My name is on the manifest. If there is a ticketing error, the airline needs to refund me and provide alternative arrangements. You cannot just throw me out because this flight attendant prefers this gentleman over me. Richard Langley scoffed loudly. I fly this route every week. I have a standing reservation for 2A. Just get her out of here so we can take off. I have a meeting in Mayfair at 9. Mr. Langley's assistant called and confirmed he wanted the seat just as boarding started. Susan chimed in, lying smoothly. She took it before we could block it out. That is a lie, Chloe said, her voice finally sharpening. The seat was open. I bought it. This is a commercial airline, not a private country club. Ma'am, I'm not going to ask you again, Officer Miller growled, stepping right to the edge of her pod. Get up. At that moment, two things happened simultaneously. In seat 3B, just behind Chloe, a 19-year-old college student named Tyler pulled his smartphone out of his pocket and hit record, holding it discreetly near his chest. Across the aisle in 1F, Jessica, a sharp-eyed corporate litigator, did the exact same thing, angling her phone to get a perfect view of the officers. I am not moving, Chloe repeated, gripping the armrests of her seat. I know my rights. This is a breach of contract and an illegal eviction from a commercial flight. Have it your way, Miller snapped. He lunged forward. The violence of it shocked the entire cabin. There was no gentle hand on the shoulder, no warning. Officer Miller's massive hands clamped down on Chloe's left arm, his fingers digging brutally into her bicep. Officer Davies, following his partner's lead, reached over the console and grabbed her right arm. Hey, Chloe screamed, the sudden pain shooting up to her shoulders. Don't touch me. Get your hands off me. Stop resisting. Miller bellowed, leaning his weight back. With a sickening jerk, they hoisted Chloe out of the seat. She scrambled for purchase, her stockinged feet slipping on the carpet. She wasn't fighting back, but she wasn't going limp either. The sheer panic of the assault made her tense her body. What are you doing? Jessica, the lawyer in 1F, yelled, standing up. She has a ticket. You're assaulting her. Sit down and mind your business, miss, or you're off next. Susan snapped at Jessica, her mask of customer service completely shattered. Miller and Davies hauled Chloe into the narrow aisle. Her blazer caught on the edge of the console, the expensive fabric ripping with a loud SKRRT. The force of the pull threw Chloe off balance. She stumbled forward, her knee slamming hard into the metal base of seat 1A. A sharp cry of pain escaped her lips, and the impact split the skin through her thin tights. Blood instantly began to bead on her knee. Walk, Miller shouted, shoving her from behind. My bag, my briefcase, Chloe gasped, trying to turn around. Her briefcase contained the highly confidential, unbacked-up physical contracts for the $80 million merger. Forget the bag. Davies panicked, grabbing her by the collar of her silk blouse. The fabric strained and popped, two buttons flying off and pinging against the cabin walls. They didn't let her walk. They dragged her, with Miller holding her left arm and shoving her back, and Davies pulling her forward by the collar and right arm. They literally dragged Chloe Hastings, a highly respected executive, a daughter, a human being, down the aisle of the airplane. Her feet scraped uselessly against the floor. Her breathing came in ragged, terrified gasps. This is insane, Tyler shouted from his seat, his phone capturing every brutal second. He tracked the officers as they dragged her past the galley and out the front door of the aircraft, her heel catching on the metal threshold of the plane door. Please, Chloe cried out as they yanked her into the jet bridge, out of sight of the passengers. I paid for my seat. The heavy cabin door slammed shut behind them. Inside the first-class cabin, absolute dead silence fell. Richard Langley calmly stepped over a button from Chloe's blouse, placed his leather duffel in the overhead bin, and sat down in seat 2A. Susan smoothed her skirt, took a deep breath, and put her plastic smile back on. Can I get anyone a pre-departure beverage? Champagne, perhaps? Jessica stared at the flight attendant in sheer horror. She looked down at her phone. She had 3 minutes of crystal clear, high-definition 4K video. Without a second thought, she connected to the airport's Wi-Fi. Tyler, a few rows back, was already uploading his angle to TikTok and X, formerly Twitter. His caption was simple: Meridian Airlines just brutally assaulted a black woman in first class so a rich white guy could take her seat. Make this famous. The plane pushed back from the gate, but the real storm was just beginning. The holding room beneath Terminal 4 was cold, smelling faintly of bleach and stale coffee. Chloe sat on a hard metal chair, trembling. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving behind a profound, hollow shock and a throbbing pain in her shoulder and knee. Her silk blouse was torn open at the collar, exposing her collarbone. Her knee was bruised and crusted with dried blood. Her briefcase was nowhere to be found. The door clicked open, and David Jenkins walked in. Jenkins was the regional manager for Meridian Airlines, a slick, fast-talking corporate fixer who dealt with delayed baggage, angry drunks, and minor lawsuits. He wore a cheap suit and a patronizing expression. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't offer her a doctor. He tossed a manila folder onto the metal table in front of her. Miss Hastings," Jenkins said smoothly, pulling up a chair and sitting backward on it, trying to look casual. "Well, this is an unfortunate mess, isn't it? I've spoken with the flight crew. It seems you became belligerent and physically threatening when asked to correct a ticketing error." Chloe slowly lifted her head. Her dark eyes, usually warm and expressive, were completely dead. "I was assaulted. Your staff stole my seat, gave it to someone else, and your thugs dragged me out of the plane." Jenkins chuckled, a dismissive, ugly sound. "Let's not use dramatic words like a so. The police aren't involved, just aviation security. It's an internal matter. Now the airline is willing to be generous. We recognize that reaccommodation can be stressful. Inside that folder is a voucher for $500 on future Meridian flights, and a full refund for your original economy ticket." Chloe stared at the folder. And a standard non-disclosure agreement. "You sign it, stating that the matter is resolved to your satisfaction. You don't sue us. You don't talk to the press. And we put you on a first-class flight to London on our competitor tomorrow morning. We'll even find your bag." Jenkins smiled, revealing slightly yellowed teeth. "It's a good deal, Chloe. You don't want the hassle of a legal fight. You disrupted a flight. You could be facing federal charges." He was trying to scare her. He thought she was just an exhausted, frightened traveler who didn't know the law. He didn't know he was sitting across from a woman who routinely negotiated with absolute corporate sharks for breakfast. Chloe slowly reached out and placed her hand flat on the manila folder. She didn't open it. She just slid it back across the table until it bumped against Jenkins' knuckles. "I want my briefcase," Chloe said, her voice dropping an octave, cold and precise. "I want the name of the flight attendant. I want the badge numbers of the two men who laid hands on me. And I want you to step out of this room so I can call my legal counsel." Jenkins' smile vanished. "Mrs. Hastings, I don't think you understand the position you're in. We have eyewitness statements from the crew. I don't think you understand the position you're in," Chloe interrupted, leaning forward. "My name is Chloe Hastings. I am the Vice President of Global Acquisitions for Red Shield Tech. Inside my missing briefcase are contracts worth $80 million. If those contracts are lost, my company will sue Meridian Airlines for the full valuation of the merger. Furthermore, I legally purchased that seat. It is a violation of FAA regulations to forcefully remove a compliant passenger for the sake of VIP favoritism. Now get out of this room and bring me my bag." Jenkins paled slightly. He swallowed hard, stood up, and grabbed the folder. "You're making a mistake." He turned and left, locking the door behind him. What Jenkins didn't know, what nobody in Meridian Airlines management knew yet, was that the internet was already on fire. 2,000 miles away, in a luxury ski lodge in Aspen, Colorado, Arthur Pendleton was pouring himself a glass of 20-year-old Macallan. Arthur was the CEO of Meridian Airlines. At 62, he was a ruthless, numbers-driven executive who had spent the last 5 years cutting costs, shrinking legroom, and boosting shareholder dividends to record highs. He was arrogant, deeply disconnected from the daily operations of his airline, and currently enjoying a 2-week vacation. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Bradley Hammond, his VP of Public Relations. "Arthur, we have a code red. Check Twitter immediately. Call me." Annoyed, Arthur set his scotch down, pulled out his reading glasses, and opened the app. He didn't even have to search. It was the #1 trending topic worldwide. Boycott Meridian, Meridian assault, Seat 2A. Arthur tapped the top video. It was Tyler's footage, the screen filled with the cramped, luxurious interior of first class. Arthur watched in mounting horror as his own branded security officers violently grabbed a screaming, well-dressed black woman, tearing her clothes and dragging her like a piece of luggage down the aisle. He heard the sickening thud of her knee hitting the metal console. He saw the wealthy white man calmly step over her torn buttons to take her seat. The video had been up for exactly 3 hours. It had 42 million views. Arthur's heart slammed against his ribs. He immediately dialed Bradley Hammond. "Tell me this is fake," Arthur barked the second the line connected. "Tell me this is AI. Tell me this is a movie set." "It's real, Arthur." Bradley sounded like he was hyperventilating. "Flight 402 out of JFK to Heathrow. An hour ago, it's a total disaster. CNN is running it, MSNBC. Fox. It's everywhere. The NABCP just issued a statement. The ACLU is mobilizing. Why was she removed?" Arthur shouted, pacing in front of his massive stone fireplace. "Was she a terrorist? Was she drunk? Did she attack the crew?" "No," Bradley whimpered. "Arthur, it was an overbooking issue." "Well, not even overbooking. Our lead flight attendant, Susan Cartwright, apparently gave the seat to Richard Langley. Langley is a Diamond Elite. The passenger, Chloe Hastings, had bought a gate upgrade." Arthur stopped pacing. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "Wait, are you telling me?" "We dragged a paying customer out of first class, by her neck, so a rich guy could take her seat." "Yes, and who authorized the physical removal?" "Cartwright called airport security. She claimed the passenger was aggressive." "But Arthur, there are 6 different videos from passengers. The woman was sitting perfectly still. She wasn't raising her voice. It's, Arthur, it looks like a hate crime. It looks like a systemic, violent, racist eviction." "Release a statement," Arthur snapped, his corporate survival instincts kicking in. "Draft something immediately. Apologize for the disruption. Say we are investigating. Calm the market down. Our stock opens in 6 hours, Bradley. Do it now. I've already drafted one. I'm putting it out on the main corporate account now." It was the second worst mistake Meridian Airlines would make that day. 15 minutes later, the official Meridian Airlines account posted a statement drafted in a panic by Bradley Hammond. "This is an upsetting event to all of us here at Meridian. We apologize for having to reaccommodate these customers. Our team is moving with a sense of urgency to work with the authorities and conduct our own detailed review of what happened. We are also reaching out to this passenger to talk directly to her and further address and resolve this situation." The internet read the word reaccommodate. They looked at the video of Chloe Hastings bleeding, screaming, and being dragged by her collar, and the internet went to war. Within minutes of the statement, the backlash was apocalyptic. Celebrities, politicians, and rival airlines began dunking on the horrific corporate speak. "Reaccommodate," tweeted a famous late-night host. Is that what we're calling assault and battery now? I hope she owns the airline by Friday. Back in the windowless room at JFK, the door unlocked. A different man walked in. This one wore a sharp suit and carried a briefcase. He looked at Chloe, at her torn clothes, and his eyes softened. "Miss Hastings?" he asked gently. "Who are you?" Chloe asked, her voice raspy. "My name is Jonathan Davis. I'm a senior partner at Davis & Croft. I represent Red Shield Tech. Your CEO called me personally 20 minutes ago." He set his briefcase down and pulled out his phone. "Meridian is trying to sweep this under the rug. They released a statement calling this a re-accommodation." Chloe let out a dark, bitter laugh. "Re-accommodation." "Chloe," Jonathan said softly, showing her the phone screen. "You need to see this." Chloe looked at the screen. She saw the video of herself. She saw the millions of views. She saw the absolute outrage pouring out from every corner of the globe. She watched the video of herself being dragged, and the tears she had held back for 2 hours finally spilled over her cheeks. It was humiliating to be seen like that, but it was also validating. She wasn't crazy. It had happened, and the world saw it. "What do we do?" she asked, wiping her eyes, her spine straightening. Jonathan smiled, a predatory, brilliant lawyer's smile. "We don't sign a damn thing. We walk out of here. We go to a hospital to document your injuries. And then, Chloe, we bring this entire airline to its knees." The emergency room at New York Presbyterian Hospital was a stark, blindingly white contrast to the dim, amber-lit luxury of the first-class cabin Chloe Hastings had been violently dragged from just hours earlier. It was 3:15 a.m. The air smelled of sharp antiseptic and stale coffee. Chloe sat on the edge of a crinkling, paper-lined examination table, a thin hospital gown draped over her shoulders. Her ruined silk blouse, now considered physical evidence, was sealed inside a clear plastic police bag resting on the counter. Dr. Sarah Lynn, a meticulous attending physician, with kind eyes but a completely professional demeanor, adjusted the bright overhead examination lamp. "I need to document the contusions on your left deltoid and the deep tissue bruising around your right bicep, Doctor," Lynn said softly, holding up a digital camera. "I also need close-ups of the laceration on your knee and the strain trauma on your neck. Try to remain as still as possible." Chloe nodded silently. Every flash of the camera felt like a distinct punctuation mark on the worst night of her life. The physical pain was a dull, constant throb, but the psychological shock was a cold, suffocating weight pressing down on her chest. She had been treated like garbage, stripped of her dignity, her autonomy, and her safety, all because she dared to occupy space she had rightfully purchased. In the corner of the small examination room stood Jonathan Davis. The senior partner had not left her side since he arrived at Terminal 4. His tailored suit was slightly wrinkled now, his tie loosened, but his eyes were sharp and predatory. He was tapping relentlessly on his smartphone, coordinating a legal offensive that would soon shake the very foundations of the aviation industry. "They found the briefcase," Jonathan announced, his voice slicing through the quiet hum of the hospital room. He looked up, his jaw set in a hard line. "But it wasn't on the plane, Chloe." Chloe winced as Doctor. Lynn gently palpated her swollen shoulder. "Where was it?" "Terminal security footage caught Susan Cartwright, the lead flight attendant, carrying it off the jet bridge while you were being held in the downstairs detention room. She didn't hand it over to Lost and Found. She walked it directly over to a commercial disposal chute near the maintenance elevators and threw it down." Jonathan's eyes darkened with sheer disbelief. "She attempted to destroy it. The airport maintenance crew just recovered it from the basement compactor level. The locking mechanism is smashed and the leather is ruined, but the $80 million merger contracts inside are intact." A cold, terrifying silence filled the room. The stakes had just catastrophically escalated. This was no longer just a civil rights violation or an assault case. This was willful corporate sabotage. Susan Cartwright, acting as an agent of Meridian Airlines, had intentionally attempted to destroy high-level corporate property out of pure, unadulterated spite. "She wanted to punish me," Chloe whispered, the realization settling over her like ice. "She didn't just want my seat. She wanted to erase my presence. She wanted to ruin my life." "She ruined her own," Jonathan replied coldly, "and she just handed us the sword to decapitate her CEO. The Department of Transportation has already opened an inquiry. The FAA is demanding the unedited flight logs, but the real bloodbath starts in exactly 5 hours. At 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange rang. For Arthur Pendleton, CEO of Meridian Airlines, the sound was akin to a funeral toll. He was standing in his expansive glass-walled office at the corporate headquarters in Chicago, staring at the multi-monitor Bloomberg terminal on his desk. He had abandoned his Aspen vacation, taking the red-eye private flight back to Illinois, desperate to manage the crisis from his seat of power. But power is an illusion when the entire world decides they despise you. The moment the market opened, Meridian Airlines stock ticker MRDN didn't just drop, it completely plummeted. The catastrophic viral video, which had now amassed over 120 million views across multiple platforms, had triggered a massive algorithmic sell-off. Institutional investors were dumping shares by the millions. $42 down to $38 in 3 minutes, murmured Bradley Hammond, the heavily sweating VP of Public Relations, standing nervously behind Arthur's leather chair. "We just lost $400 million in market capitalization, Arthur. It's accelerating. It's a free fall." Arthur's face was the color of ash. His hands gripped the edge of his mahogany desk so hard his knuckles turned white. What about the damage control? What about the morning shows? "It's a massacre," Bradley admitted, his voice cracking. "Gayle King spent 10 minutes on CBS tearing our statement to shreds. CNN has an aviation legal expert dissecting the FAA regulations we violated. The hashtag Boycott Meridian is trending globally. Even worse, Richard Langley, the Diamond Elite passenger who took her seat, just got fired. His hedge fund, Vanguard Capital, issued a press release an hour ago, distancing themselves from him, stating they do not tolerate entitlement and complicity in violence. They severed him completely." "Good. Throw him under the bus," Arthur snarled, pacing the length of his office. "Blame him. Say he pressured the crew. Say he threatened to pull corporate contracts if he didn't get the seat." "We can't," Bradley said softly. A new video surfaced an hour ago, shot from the galley by a junior flight attendant who just quit and leaked it to the press. It shows Susan Cartwright talking to Langley before the incident. Langley explicitly says, "I can wait for the next flight, Susan, it's fine." And Susan replies, "Absolutely not, mister. Langley, you are our priority. I will remove the woman in 2A. She doesn't belong up here anyway." Arthur stopped pacing. The blood drained entirely from his head. The defense of accommodating a demanding VIP had just vanished. It was unvarnished, blatant discrimination, documented on video. And worse, his own PR department had released a tone-deaf statement defending the action as a re-accommodation. The phone on Arthur's desk rang. It was the private, secure line, the one only the board of directors used. Arthur stared at the blinking red light. He took a deep, shaky breath and picked up the receiver. "Pendleton, Arthur, it's David Vance." The voice of the chairman of the board echoed coldly through the line. "Our stock has dropped 18%. We are bleeding nearly $1 billion in valuation." The NABCP is calling for a federal civil rights investigation. You have failed to manage this crisis. Your re-accommodation tweet has made us the laughingstock of the corporate world. David, I am handling it, Arthur lied, his voice tight. I'm firing Cartwright. I'm firing the security officers. You are going to do exactly as the board instructs, the chairman interrupted, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. You are going to get on your Gulfstream G50. You are going to fly to Teterboro Airport in New Jersey right now. You are going to find Chloe Hastings, and you are going to grovel. You will apologize to her in person. You will offer her whatever obscene amount of money her lawyers demand to make this go away today. If you do not have a signed non-disclosure agreement and a public statement of forgiveness from her by sundown, the board will convene tonight to terminate your contract for cause. Do you understand me? Arthur swallowed the bile rising in his throat. He, the king of the aviation industry, a man who ruthlessly crushed unions and bought politicians, was being ordered to beg a 34-year-old woman for his corporate life. I understand, Arthur whispered. Don't screw this up, Arthur. Your head is on the chopping block. The line went dead. Arthur slammed the phone down. He turned to Bradley, his eyes filled with a desperate, terrifying panic. Fuel the jet, call the scent. Regis Hotel in New York. Find out what suite she's in. We're going to war. The presidential suite at the Saint. Regis Hotel in Midtown Manhattan cost $12,000 a night. Red Shield Tech, furious over the treatment of their star vice president, had booked it without a second thought, transforming the opulent, silk wallpapered rooms into a high-tech legal war room. Paralegals scurried across the plush carpets, carrying stacks of printed legal precedents. Whiteboards were erected over the antique marble fireplaces, covered in timelines, names, and financial leverage points. Chloe sat in a high-backed velvet armchair by the window, looking out over Fifth Avenue. She wore a soft cashmere sweater provided by the hotel boutique, though the thick fabric could barely hide the heavy bandages wrapping her shoulder and knee. She looked physically battered, but her eyes, staring out at the relentless movement of the city below, were burning with an icy, unyielding fire. She was no longer just a victim. She was an apex predator waiting for the prey to walk into the trap. He's in the lobby, Jonathan Davis announced, stepping into the main living area of the suite. He adjusted his silk tie, a grim smile playing on his lips. Arthur Pendleton, CEO of Meridian Airlines. He's flanked by their chief legal counsel, Robert Kessler, and a massive PR entourage. He looks like a man walking to the gallows. Let him sweat, Chloe said softly, not turning away from the window. Hold him in the hallway for exactly 15 minutes. Let him stare at the door. Strip him of his momentum. Jonathan's smile widened. Brilliant. I'll have security detain them at the threshold. For 15 agonizing minutes, Arthur Pendleton, a man whose time was valued at thousands of dollars a minute, stood awkwardly in the opulent, hushed corridor of the Saint. Regis, his PR team whispered frantically among themselves, checking stock prices on their iPads. Every tick downward was another nail in Arthur's coffin. Robert Kessler, his weary-looking lawyer, simply stared at the floor, knowing the legal massacre that awaited them. Finally, the heavy mahogany double doors swung open. Arthur stepped into the suite, expecting to find a sobbing, traumatized woman he could easily manipulate with a grand gesture and a fat check. Instead, he walked into a meticulously organized command center. Jonathan Davis stood at the head of a long mahogany table, flanked by 3 junior partners, and seated in the velvet chair, looking utterly composed and devastatingly intimidating, was Chloe Hastings. Mrs. Hastings, Arthur began, plastering on a deeply practiced expression of fatherly sorrow. He took a step forward, extending his hand. "I am Arthur Pendleton. I flew in from Chicago the moment I understood the gravity of what occurred. Words cannot express how deeply, profoundly sorry I am for the horrific experience you endured on our aircraft." Chloe did not stand up. She did not take his hand. She simply stared at it until he awkwardly lowered it to his side. "Sit down, Mr. Pendleton," Chloe commanded, her voice soft but echoing with absolute authority. Arthur bristled at being ordered around, but Kessler quickly placed a hand on his arm, guiding him to a chair across the table from Jonathan. "Miss Hastings, we want to make this right," Arthur continued, leaning forward, trying to project earnestness. "What happened to you was a tragic breakdown in our protocols. The flight attendant involved, Susan Cartwright, has been terminated. The security officers have been suspended pending termination. It was a terrible mistake, and as the CEO, the buck stops with me. I am here to personally apologize and offer a massive compensation package." Arthur nodded to Kessler, who slid a sleek, black folder across the polished wood of the table. "Inside that folder," Arthur said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper, "is a settlement agreement for $15 million, tax-free, paid into your accounts within 24 hours. In exchange, we ask for a mutual non-disparagement clause, an NDA, and a joint press release stating that we have amicably resolved the situation and that you forgive the airline." Chloe looked at the black folder. $15 million. It was an astronomical sum. It was change your life, never work again money. It was exactly what Arthur thought would buy her silence and save his job. She slowly reached out, picked up the folder, and opened it. She scanned the first page, her expression unreadable. Then she closed it. $15 million, Chloe said, tasting the words. For the bruises, for the public humiliation, for being dragged like a dog in front of strangers. "It is a very generous offer, Miss Hastings," Kessler interjected smoothly. "Far beyond what any court would award for a standard civil assault claim." Chloe ignored the lawyer. She kept her eyes locked on Arthur Pendleton. "You said this was a tragic breakdown in protocol, Mr. Pendleton, an isolated incident." "Yes, absolutely. A rogue employee," Arthur agreed eagerly, thinking he was making headway. "A rogue employee," Chloe repeated. She reached into the pocket of her slacks and pulled out a small, silver digital audio recorder. She pressed a button. The room fell dead silent as the recording played. It wasn't the viral video. It was a phone conversation. "Look, Bradley, just pay the bitch off. I don't care what it costs. The board is threatening my neck. Offer her 10, 15 million, whatever. Just get her to shut up so the stock stops bleeding. I have a tea time at Augusta this weekend, and I am not missing it over some entitled passenger making a scene." Arthur's face went completely, sickeningly white. The blood drained from his lips. Kessler gasped, turning horrified eyes toward his client. Chloe pressed the button, stopping the recording. She set the device gently on the table. "My PR team has friends in your PR team, Arthur," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a terrifying, lethal whisper. "Bradley Hammond is so terrified of going to prison for corporate fraud. He started recording your calls this morning. A simple, anonymous tip to my lawyers yielded this beautiful piece of audio." That is an illegal wiretap," Arthur stammered, his hands shaking violently. "That is inadmissible." "This isn't a courtroom, Arthur." Jonathan Davis smiled, leaning his hands on the table. "This is a negotiation, and New York is a one-party consent state. Your PR director consented. It's perfectly legal and perfectly devastating." Chloe leaned forward, the exhaustion vanishing from her face, replaced by absolute dominance. "You didn't come here to apologize, Arthur. You came here to buy a fire extinguisher because your house is burning down. But you don't realize that I am the one holding the gasoline." She slid the black folder back across the table. "I don't want your $15 million, Chloe said. "I don't want your money at all. Here is my counter-offer." Jonathan handed Chloe a thick, professionally bound legal document. She tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "That is a demand for structural restructuring," Chloe stated. "Meridian Airlines will create a $75 million fund dedicated to passenger rights advocacy and bias training, overseen by an independent third-party board that I will select. You will permanently overhaul your VIP upgrade protocol, making it entirely transparent and automated, removing all human bias from the equation. Furthermore," she paused, locking eyes with the broken CEO, "you are going to resign, Arthur, effective immediately. You will step down as CEO, citing a desire to take accountability for the toxic culture you have fostered. You will forfeit your golden parachute severance package, and you will personally fund the civil lawsuits I am about to bring against Susan Cartwright and the 2 men who assaulted me." Arthur stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "You're insane. I will not resign. I built this company. You can't force me out. If you don't sign that document by 5 p.m. today," Chloe said softly, "I will release the recording of you calling me a bitch to Anderson Cooper. I will release the terminal security footage of your employee throwing my $80 million corporate contracts into a trash compactor. I will personally ensure that the Department of Justice opens a criminal probe into Meridian's deliberate destruction of evidence. By Monday, your stock will be penny shares, and the board won't just fire you, Arthur. They will feed you to the wolves." She stood up slowly, ignoring the pain in her knee. She looked down at the most powerful man in aviation, a man who was now trembling in his bespoke suit. "You thought I was just a passenger in the wrong seat," Chloe whispered, her eyes flashing with a righteous, furious fire. "You picked the wrong woman, Arthur. Now, get out of my hotel room and call your board. You have exactly 2 hours to end your own career." Arthur Pendleton stumbled out of the presidential suite at the St. Regis Hotel, feeling as though the floor beneath him had turned to liquid. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind him, sealing his fate with the finality of a coffin lid. Robert Kessler, his chief legal counsel, walked beside him in stunned, pale silence. The luxury corridor, adorned with crystal sconces and thick carpets, suddenly felt like a suffocating tunnel. "Robert," Arthur croaked, his voice cracking violently. "Call David. Call the board. We need an injunction. We need to claim extortion." Kessler stopped walking. He turned to look at the CEO, his expression devoid of the usual deference. "Extortion, Arthur. She has you on tape explicitly instructing a cover-up. She has terminal footage of Susan Cartwright committing a federal felony. If we take this to a judge, she will release the audio to the press before the ink is dry on the filing. Meridian's stock will hit zero. You have no leverage. You have no legal shield. The game is over." Arthur pulled his phone from his pocket. His hands trembled so violently he dropped it on the carpet. He scrambled to pick it up, dialing David, the chairman of the board. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. He dialed again, sent straight to voicemail. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. The board had already abandoned him. They had watched the stock hemorrhage, another 12% in the last hour. They were cutting the infected limb to save the host, and Arthur was the infection. Down in the lobby, reality was moving faster than Arthur could comprehend. In a quiet, leafy suburb in New Jersey, 2 unmarked black sedans pulled into the driveway of Susan Cartwright's pristine colonial home. 4 federal agents from the Department of Transportation's office of the Inspector General stepped out, accompanied by local police. Susan opened the door, wearing a cashmere cardigan, holding a cup of tea, completely oblivious to the hurricane about to destroy her life. "Susan Cartwright?" the lead agent asked, flashing his badge. "You are under arrest for the intentional destruction of high-value corporate property, evidence tampering, and federal aviation civil rights violations. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." Her teacup shattered on the hardwood floor. The arrogant, untouchable lead flight attendant, who had spent decades dictating, who belonged in her cabin based on her own prejudiced algorithms, was handcuffed on her own front porch, sobbing as her neighbors watched from their windows. Back in Manhattan, Arthur sat in the back of his chauffeured Mercedes, staring blankly at the leather seat ahead of him. The clock on the dashboard read 4:30 in the afternoon, 30 minutes until Chloe Hastings released the audio. "There has to be a way to buy her off," Arthur muttered, gnawing on his thumbnail. "Who is Red Shield Tech? What do they actually do?" Kessler, furiously typing on his iPad, suddenly froze. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. "Arthur," he whispered, his voice trembling with sheer, unadulterated terror. "The $80 million buyout Chloe Hastings was negotiating. The contract Susan Cartwright threw into the compactor. What about them?" Arthur snapped impatiently. "It's a cybersecurity firm. We'll pay the damages." "They were acquiring Aegis Network Solutions," Kessler said, slowly looking up. "Arthur, Aegis holds the exclusive proprietary patents for the centralized dispatch and logistics software that Meridian Airlines uses. Every single Meridian flight, every crew schedule, every fuel manifest runs through Aegis servers. Chloe Hastings didn't just have PR leverage. With this acquisition, Red Shield Tech now owns our operational infrastructure. If she terminates our vendor contract due to a breach of corporate ethics, every single Meridian plane on Earth gets grounded indefinitely. She holds the keys to the entire fleet." Arthur stopped breathing. The air in the car turned to ice. It wasn't just a threat of bad press. It was absolute, immediate annihilation. He had authorized the assault of the very woman who held the remote control to his entire empire. He didn't just pick a fight with a passenger. He had dragged the executioner out of her seat. "Give me the paper," Arthur whispered, his spirit completely and utterly shattered. At 4:55 p.m., Robert Kessler emailed the signed, unconditional resignation of CEO Arthur Pendleton to the Meridian Board of Directors, along with a signed copy of Chloe's sweeping structural demands. Arthur surrendered his golden parachute, his stock options, and his legacy. The king was dead. 6 months later, the air inside the first-class cabin of a British Airways Boeing 787 Dreamliner was cool, crisp, and smelled faintly of lavender and expensive leather. Flight 114 to London was fully boarded and preparing for departure from JFK. Chloe Hastings sat in seat 1A. She wore a sharp, tailored navy blue suit, her hair perfectly styled, her posture radiating an effortless, terrifying power. The physical bruises from that horrific night had long since faded, leaving behind pristine skin, but the emotional scars had hardened into something impenetrable. She was no longer just the vice president of global acquisitions. Following the masterful, ruthless execution of the Aegis buyout and the subsequent toppling of a corrupt airline CEO, Red Shield Tech's board of directors had unanimously voted her in as the new chief executive officer. She looked out the large, dimmable window, watching the runway lights flicker in the dusk. A lot had changed in 6 months. The aviation industry had been rocked to its core. Meridian Airlines was currently bleeding money, struggling to rebrand under a new, terrified leadership team who walked on eggshells to avoid public backlash. The $75 million passenger advocacy fund, officially named the Hastings Initiative, was actively suing airlines for discriminatory practices, winning massive settlements for marginalized travelers. The people who had wronged her had faced the absolute wrath of social karma and legal destruction. Susan Cartwright had pleaded guilty to felony destruction of property to avoid a massive federal trial. She was currently serving 18 months in a minimum security correctional facility in upstate New York, forever banned from the aviation industry. Her pension completely voided. Officer Miller and Officer Davies, the two men who had physically dragged Chloe down the aisle, had been fired, publicly disgraced, and hit with crippling civil lawsuits funded entirely by Arthur Pendleton's frozen assets. Both men were bankrupt, working minimum-wage night shifts at a warehouse, unable to find work in security ever again. And Arthur Pendleton, the disgraced former CEO, had retreated to his estate in Colorado, a pariah in the corporate world. His legacy was permanently cemented as the cautionary tale of corporate hubris and unchecked entitlement. He had lost his power, his reputation, and his fortune in the span of a single afternoon. "Excuse me, Ms. Hastings?" Chloe turned her head. A young, impeccably dressed British flight attendant stood beside her pod, holding a silver tray with a crystal flute of vintage champagne. His name tag read Thomas. He smiled warmly, bowing his head slightly in genuine respect. "The captain wanted me to personally welcome you aboard, ma'am," Thomas said smoothly. "We are honored to have you flying with us today. Is the temperature in your pod to your liking? Can I offer you a warm towel or adjust your seat?" Chloe looked at the champagne, then at the flight attendant. There was no hesitation in his eyes, no biased calculations, no assumptions. Just pure, unadulterated professional respect. The world had watched what happened to the last crew that dared to underestimate her. The industry had learned its lesson. "The temperature is perfect, Thomas." Chloe smiled, a genuine, relaxed expression that reached her dark eyes. She reached out and took the crystal flute from the silver tray. "And the champagne is lovely. Thank you." "It is my absolute pleasure, ma'am," Thomas said. "We will be pushing back from the gate in exactly 2 minutes. Please let me know if you require anything at all during the flight." He stepped back, disappearing into the galley. Chloe took a slow sip of the champagne. It was cold, crisp, and tasted like absolute victory. She opened her laptop, the screen illuminating her face with a soft blue light. On the screen was the final integration report for the Aegis network software. Red Shield Tech was thriving. She had taken the worst night of her life, the most profound humiliation she had ever faced, and weaponized it into an empire. She had refused to be a victim. She had refused the hush money. She had chosen to burn the corrupt system to the ground and build something better on the ashes. The massive engines of the Dreamliner hummed to life, a deep, powerful vibration that resonated through the cabin floor. The plane began to push back from the gate, slowly at first, then gaining momentum as it turned toward the active runway. Chloe closed her eyes, sinking back into the plush leather of seat 1A. As the plane accelerated down the tarmac and lifted effortlessly into the dark, starlit sky above New York City, she felt a profound sense of peace. The turbulence was over. She was exactly where she belonged, at the very top, untouchable, and soaring higher than anyone who had ever tried to pull her down. If this story of ultimate karma made your blood boil and then cheer for justice, you know what to do. Hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that entitlement never wins. And subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life revenge stories. We drop new jaw-dropping narratives every single week, exposing the truth behind the headlines. Don't miss out on the drama, the twists, and the ultimate vindications. Your support helps us bring these hidden stories to light. Click subscribe, turn on notifications, and join our community of truth seekers right now. See you soon.